You don't have to look too long at your social media pages to see people fighting with each other. Politics, family, current events, they're all fodder for animosity. Worse still, there are Christians fighting too. Venomous words being thrown over every possible doctrine imaginable. Threats of hell and biblical compromise. There are even attacks on whether people are Christians at all. Today in the church, we see constant splitting and division. In fact, since the Reformation of the 16th century, there's been 45,000 new Christian denominations, and that's increasing. And yet, one of Jesus' final prayers for the church is that we should all be as one. That we may be one in him, Jesus prayed, just as he is in the Father, so that we would be all brought together in complete unity. Then the world would know who Jesus is. How did we get it so wrong? And what can we do about it? Well, the first thing is to acknowledge that there will always be debates. There will always be differences of opinion, even in the church. In fact, in my day, I remember there were lots of debates going around about divorce and remarriage and the gifts of the Spirit. But these days, the debates tend to be about sexuality, LGBTQI issues, feminism. But we remember too that in the early church, there were debates too, lots of differences of opinion and argument there. The big topics of debate back then was the issue of what do you do with food that had been offered to idols, which sort of festivals should you observe. And one of the hottest topics was the issue of circumcision. So what we see is the Apostle Paul, a church leader in his time, writes a lot of instructions around this area to try and help the church to be one. He wrote letters to churches in Corinth and Colossae, in Ephesus, and he said things like the call to be completely humble, gentle, patient, bear with one another in love, listen to one another. And then he says, make every effort to do this. In other words, it's work. It's hard. We need to work at maintaining unity. And that means being honest about our differences, but at the core, being united about what brings us together. I think about the example of Jesus. You see, in the early days when he assembled those early disciples, I wonder how it felt. For example, when he first introduced them. Simon, meet Matthew. Matthew meets Simon. Matthew was a tax collector. He was profiting off the dominion of Rome over the Jews. Simon was a zealot. Everything in him wanted to defeat and bring down the Romans so that the Jews would be freed. You couldn't get two more polar opposites. It would be like left versus right, progressive versus conservative, black versus white. And yet Jesus brings them together. And what unites them? The call to follow him. You see, at the call, when we are united by the desire to follow Jesus, we can then deal with those other issues. Paul calls them disputable matters. He said, yeah, there are some differences among us. And he says not to quarrel about them, but remember to maintain our unity. In what? In the fact that we are one body, one spirit. We have one hope, one faith, one Lord, one baptism, one God. In fact, he reminded us that there is a core, there's a common center. Even though we have disputes, even when we have differences and debates, we don't go about policing the border ground. Instead, we focus on our center, our core, following Jesus. We do the hard work of unity, that the world may know who Jesus is. Thanks for listening to Everyday God Conversations today. It's been a delight to have you with us. For more on having your own God conversation, go to godconversations.com.